this changed landscape of the way groups get things done. But before I do that, I want to start with the big claim, essentially the claim that I thought made it worth writing this book in the first place, and that is this. We are living through the largest increase in expressive capability in the history of the human race. That's a big claim. It needs some backing up. Here's the backup. 4 times in the last 500 years, the media landscape has been turned upside down. First one famously was the invention of the printing press and movable type, considered as one long period of innovation. In a way, that was the invention that gave us anything we could call a media landscape. Next up, telegraph, later the telephone, working on roughly the same principles but with voice, two-way communication, point to point. Then prolonged explosion in recorded media, first images, then sound, then moving images with sound. And finally, a little over 100 years ago, we harnessed electromagnetic spectrum, able to send images and sound through the air, got radio and TV. This is up until recently. These 4 overlapping revolutions are up until recently what we lived in, what we knew as the media landscape. But there was in the collection of them a curious asymmetry. The things that were good at creating or hosting communication were not good at creating groups. And the things that were good at creating groups were not good at creating communications. You could either broadcast, right? I own, whether it's a printing press or a television tower, I can broadcast from the center to the edge and reach people. Or I can enable 2 people to talk to each other. What I couldn't do was enable groups to talk to each other. There was a one-to-many pattern in here, and there was a one-to-one pattern in here, but there was no many-to-many pattern in here. Right? That's what we get with the internet. This thing that looks like a peacock hit a windscreen is essentially a network map of the internet. Bill Cheswick does this first out of AT&T and later out of Lumeta, his company now. So one of the big deals, right, is that we now have a medium that is natively good at group forming, right? Getting a group of people together and opening a two-way channel among all of the members of the group without regard to what kind of media they own or use. That's new. That's never happened in the media landscape we've had. But the second big deal is this, which is it's now the mode of carriage for all of the other media as well. Once something is digitized, the internet, mobile phones, the applications built on top of them are now the logical mode of carriage. And it is this fusing of the 2 previous patterns, what we were used to as broadcast and what we were used to as communications, all in one medium now, that I think is the really large transformation we're living through. We're accustomed, when we talk about the media, to be talking about a small group of professionals pushing stuff with high production values out to a large group of consumers. Once you fuse broadcast and communication, what you get is a large group of amateurs pushing and pulling stuff with low production values to one another. Every time you add a new consumer, you add a new producer as well. And every time you add a new producer, those new producers can reach an individual, right? I'm going to send some mail to my mom, but they can also reach very large groups. I'm going to blog, I'm going to Twitter, I'm going to Facebook, I'm going to MySpace, XX. Right? And that changes, I think. It's what I tried to document in Here Comes Everybody. And the thesis of the book in 5 words is group action just got easier. Right? The ability for groups of people to find each other and get things done has been radically transformed by having a medium that's natively good at group forming at a range of groups. In the book, I walk through a ladder of group activities that's basically arranged along the line of a single question, which is, how hard is it to participate? Okay. And the ladder goes sharing, collaboration, collective action. Sharing is very easy to participate in. I upload my stuff, you upload your stuff. There's some aggregate value. It's not a big deal. Collaboration is harder because we have to coordinate with one another. Collective action is the hardest of all because we not only have to coordinate, we all actually have to agree on a shared goal and achieve it or not together. And I'm going to tell some stories from each of those patterns. So, starting with sharing. This is a page from the website Flickr. You can see here, it's a pickup truck in front of a store in a sunset. It's created using a technique called high dynamic range photography. High dynamic range photography is where you take 3 different exposures of the same shot and then use software to combine it after the fact. So you get the brightest bright from the brightest exposure, the darkest dark, the bluest blue, and so on. Done right, it looks like a cross between a pre-Raphaelite painting and a photograph. There's some quite striking images on Flickr. Done wrong, it looks like a box of crayons threw up. So there's a big premium on technique, right? It's not enough to just get the software and then start using the software. So when an HDR photo goes up on Flickr, a conversation forms around that photo. Hey, if it's interesting enough, hey, cool photo, hey, that looks great, hey, how did you do that, right? And you can see here, rendered as if you had a very long, skinny browser. This is what the resulting conversation catalyzed by this original post looks like. And this is in half-point agate type. It's roughly the same thing as your financial prospectus that now everybody's suddenly rushing back to read. You can't read any of this, but you can still see what's happening, right? The answers are getting longer and longer and more involved and more involved. And then someone says, hey, I can insert an image into it. And suddenly people are inserting other good HDR images, and the whole thing turns into a tutorial. Right? So look what Flickr's done here. Right? They've reversed the usual pattern for groups of people to get value out of conversation. Ordinarily, if you had a group of people who you wanted to get together to talk about high dynamic range photography, right? You'd adopt the classic pattern of an interest group, a user group, whatever, gather, then share. Let's identify everybody who cares about high dynamic range photography, let's get them all together, we'll all talk to each other, and then we'll teach each other. On Flickr, the pattern is share, then gather. Right? The group came into being not because they were interested in HDR or interested in each other. The group came into being because they were interested in this. Right? The medium, right? The content, what we think of as being relegated to the broadcast mode, is actually the thing that draws the community together. This is a pattern of share, then gather. And one of the things it demonstrates is that every URL is a latent community. In addition to the value that's on the web page from the content of the service that's available there, every web page also hosts the attention of the people who come there to look. And there's possible additional value to be gotten out of putting those people in touch with one another. Now, at very large scale, most of that value is latent. If we were to suddenly connect everybody who's on the Google homepage right now, they wouldn't have much to say to each other. Right? But everybody who gathers to look at that image has something in common that they don't discover until they've gathered to look at that image. And so lowering the threshold of the group coming together has actually raised the value. And not just the value for the participants, right? This tutorial didn't just speed the spread of HDR as a technique that anybody could adopt and master. Right? It also remains there. Right? The radius of the conversation is much larger. Instead of it just being a conversation around a water cooler, this is a conversation that anybody on the web can get to. But the half-life of the conversation is also much longer. Right? A water cooler conversation, which clarifies something for you and seems really valuable, doesn't last past the people disassembling around the water cooler. But I didn't participate in this conversation. I found it Googling around after the fact. Right? No financial motive anywhere in sight, no group that you could have predicted in advance, and yet this group of people came together and created this. And this is just one of billions of photos on Flickr, many hundreds of thousands of which have some kind of conversation attached to them. And there are many, many sites that do some sort of mediation. So this is all very high-minded, right? This is what Etienne Wenger calls a community of practice. A group of people who come together to get better or something. Right? But these aren't the only kind of photos on Flickr, as we know. We've also got this sort of stuff.